are live. Welcome back to Empire State of Baseball, live on this Monday, December the 5th, 2022, for episode number 33, airing exclusively on Twitch and powered by StreamYard. We're looking very festive tonight with the holiday season already here. I can't believe it already. Holiday season is here, and so is the winter meetings. The winter meetings taking place in, I believe, San Diego. Oh, yes, Joe's getting all festive.
Yeah.
I love that. Love
Look
that.
at that.
The off-season series continues for our third installment of the off-season episodes, where, of course, tonight we are covering the MLB winter meetings. Corey, it was quite the day today.
It was. I mean, what a day. What a weekend. I mean, winter meetings kicking off. And if you're a Met fan, it's a wild range of emotions in the last 48 to 72 hours. Just prior to the winter meetings kicking off, you had the big DeGrom to the Rangers news. 48 hours later, you have the Verlander to the Mets news. You had another bomb a little later in the day with Trey Turner to the Phillies. So a lot of hot stove action. Love to see it. It's wild. This is one of my favorite weeks of the year in the baseball world, is the winter meetings. We've been robbed of that the last couple of years with COVID, with the lockout, all different things going on there. And even though there are typically some slow winter meetings, sometimes you have those ones that's a complete bomb, no moves. I mean, we have a ton of action, and we're barely one day into this, guys. I hope you're all enjoying it as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, enjoying it is a relative term, depending on who you want on this team. But I mean, it is a interesting time for baseball. We had three major signings today. One of which was a extension handed out by the New York Yankees, and we'll get into that in a little while. But we've had three big players go off the board since Wednesday. We have a lot more coming in the next few days. And I just hope that, we see the news kind of keep flowing in. I think the worst part about sometimes the baseball offseason gets a little dry. There's nothing to talk about for 2-3 weeks at a time. And we seem to be waiting for these random days that, the GMs decide to get together or the owners start to get together. Nothing really gets done in between that. So, I'm hoping we see a lot of action the next few days. And I think the next big domino to fall is Judge. And I think we're going to get some major news by the end of the day on Wednesday, it sounds like.
Yeah. Thomas, I mean, Judge is pretty much the biggest piece left to fall. Do you think we're going to see a Judge signing maybe by the end of today's episode?
No, I don't think by the end of today's episode. I think they said Judge isn't supposed to get down to San Diego until tomorrow, and probably, as Joe alluded to, signing by the end of Wednesday is I guess the thought. The only offer that's still even floating out there is the Yankees 8 for $300. From everything I've been reading, the Giants haven't made a formal offer yet, but they expect to. And then my guess is Judge gets that in hand, and he goes back to the Yankees and said, if the Giants know what the Yankees offer, they're not going to offer the same thing. They're going to have to up it. And Judge goes back to the Yankees and see if they'll match. I think it's probably just between those two teams at this point. And I do think we'll probably find out this week. And as also from when we're reading the beginning of Judge's free agency, it's what he wants. He wants to have it done quickly because he wants whoever team he goes to be able to make additional moves. So hopefully they do that, and then the Yankees can start filling some more of the holes on this team, improving spots, making trades, all things we've talked about last week. All that is really on hold, I think, until Judge signs. So I think we find out pretty soon.
Yeah, either it's going to be a complete retool of the team if Judge goes elsewhere, or a couple of pieces if Judge stays put. We're going to cover that and more. I know all three of you guys touched on what we're covering tonight beautifully, but we're going to start with the Mets front. And before we get into Jake and JV, Joe, what's the best way to follow and subscribe to us on Twitch?
You can download the Twitch app and subscribe to Empire State of Baseball. The link is in our Twitter bio, which is at ESB Podcast. So you can download both apps, and you go to Twitter to find our Twitch stream.
Yes, sir. That's it. So make sure to subscribe to us on Twitch. Best way to get the notifications to your phone as well. The Queen's Gambit. We're just going to follow up our 2023 offseason agenda episode where we cover the Mets with even more New York Mets because they've been the talk of the town, boys. Starting off with Friday's big news, big passing bomb of Jacob deGrom signing with the Texas Rangers and deGrom inking that deal for $185 million over 5 years. What was the initial reaction from our two Mets fans here, starting with Corey, when the news dropped on Friday?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I was actually sitting right next to Rich, and Rich broke the news from me, who got it from Mr. Passan himself. But listen, I don't want to say I was shocked because even coming into our prediction show a few weeks back, I did have a prediction that deGrom would not return to the New York Metropolitans. And I did think he was going to go to the Rangers in that particular scenario. So that ended up playing out exactly as it would. What's kind of shocking, and this is what hurts the most, is the last several seasons, we were definitely spoiled as Mets fans because every time he was go out there and go on the mound, you were going to get a quality start pretty much every time out there, if not a dominant start, especially in that 2021 season until he got hurt in July. It was just pure dominance with the ERA right around 1. And now you're talking, are you breaking records with deGrom? But the concern was definitely the injuries over the last year. Obviously, he missed half of 2021. He missed the majority of 2022 as well. And he got a big contract. I mean, he got a 5-year deal. There's a club option for a 6th year, 185. So you're just about 37 annual on that contract. The Mets actually offered more per year than the Rangers at 40 per year, 3 over 120, no options, a straight standard 3-year deal for the Mets. But from what I've heard, deGrom didn't even give the Mets a chance to match or beat the Rangers' offer. The Mets offered that contract a couple of days prior. They didn't become aware to the Rangers situation a few moments before it actually got announced. So I honestly don't think deGrom wanted to return to the Mets. I don't know if it has something to do with them blowing all of his starts. Every time he would go out there, he seemed to never get any run support, or the bullpen blew the game, so never got wins. I don't know if he resented the Mets for giving him that contract, but you can't blame the Mets. He did accept the contract, and they had him for an absolute steal for several seasons. One of the best things Brodie Van Wagenen did in his Mets tenure was that deGrom extension. I don't know what it was, but I think it's pretty evident he did not want to return to the Mets. It's upsetting to see him go, but at the same time, you have to move on, and the Mets did that today. They moved on with another big deal, and we'll get into the Verlander news shortly. But, Joe, what are your reactions with deGrom?
Yeah, I mean, listen, for me, it was very depressing for me. There's a couple aspects of it as a fan of players and people you get attached to. When you watch somebody that becomes your favorite player on the team and they leave for somewhere else, it hurts. It really does. deGrom was my favorite Met for many, many years now. Watching him at his best is basically unlike anything I've ever seen before. And I remember living through Harvey Mania. I remember this Cy Young year for R.A. Dickey. I remember Johan Santana and Pedro and everything. And deGrom was better than all those guys. I mean, deGrom at his peak is...
I mean, not even close.
He's so good. He might be one of the... He is the closest thing to Sandy Koufax from what I've read as you can possibly get. In the level of domination, at least inning to inning and pitch to pitch, that comes from him is unmatched. And I don't think that you can fill that void. So from a fan perspective of an individual player, it's depressing. I'm happy for deGrom. I'm happy he got a deal that basically will carry him to the end of his career. He deserves to get paid that much money after all that he's done, even if he is a little injury prone. And from a Met fan perspective, from being a fan of the team, it's depressing because the Mets are not a franchise with a lot of guys that you can say were our guys, right? There's two. I mean, Ed Kranepool was the first, but there's really one guy who is a top level player
Mute Joe.
in his prime that stayed to the end, and that's David Wright. And unfortunately for David, he was robbed of what was at the time on track to be a Hall of Fame career. This is the second guy where we've really said, Gooden left, Strawberry left, all those guys left, and none of them ended up having as much success outside of the Mets organization as they did with the Mets. This is the one guy who should have their number retired, who should be right next to David, who is a career Met, who has, all the accolades, who we can point to even beyond Seaver and say, this guy was the best we ever had. And that's gone. That's gone. He's gonna be remembered similar to Seaver. We're gonna be upset when we look back and say what could have happened if Jake, stays relatively healthy. He will be a Hall of Famer. He will probably go into the Hall of Fame as a Met. But it's upsetting because the immortality for the franchise, for being the franchise guy, was there for him, and he chose not to take it.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. It really does feel like he didn't want to come back. I know there was rumors even in the middle of the season, which I found really weird, especially with the essentially infinite money that Steve Cohen has. That, like, why would DeGrom leave unless he just didn't want to return? And could be any number of things. If he cares about winning, then he didn't leave for Texas for a good reason. I know they're signing a lot of big guys, but the Mets are still a far superior team than the Texas Rangers are. I don't know. It could be even stuff with the injury stuff. Maybe he was frustrated with how they were handling him. Maybe he felt like things they were asking him to do led to injuries, or he wasn't able to recover the way he wanted to. I mean, that's all like wild speculation, but it seems odd for a guy who was, like Joe said, like could be remembered like that. And it's not like the Mets were going to lowball him, that they were going to give him a ton of money for him to leave. I do think it's like that stuff can be sad for baseball, because when you see a guy be able to be a career guy and have his whole career somewhere and have the fans really connect to him, as much as I like seeing Joe sad, it's sad for baseball when guys do that. But good for him. Listen, he went out, got a ton of money, got the security, got the no state tax being in Texas.
Yep.
Yeah. My mind was blown how many years someone was willing to give him. He is, again, the most dominant pitcher we've seen. And
that's what happens when you're desperate.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and there's always a desperate team out there. We're going to get into some of that later too, but yeah, it's for a guy as injury prone as DeGrom has been, to give him that much money and for those many years, they better know something.
It makes no sense for the Texas Rangers to do that deal. And I know they need starting pitching, but to have 3 players tied up in these big contracts, and they signed Seager and Marcus Semien last season, this does not move the needle for Texas still. The Rangers are at best still a third-place team in the American League West. If the Rangers are here, the Mariners are here, the Astros are still here. So did this move the needle that much for Texas? I don't think so.
I don't think
so.
I mean, I guess your hope.
It depends. If DeGrom starts 30 games,
yes,
and wins 20 of them, well, you know what? They're gonna win. They're gonna be better than a 68-win team. If they're gonna be above a 500 team, I question that. But the other thing with this signing is they need Jake to go out and pitch 32 games.
True.
They can't. It's not like the Mets. We saw what the Mets did last year, and the Mets said, it doesn't matter what Jake does as long as he comes back and pitches a game in the postseason. And of course he did, and he won. But at the end of the day, the Texas Rangers can't afford to do that. The Mets just showed you they can afford to do that. They can bring in any other guy. They brought in Scherzer to be the insurance policy to DeGrom. Texas needs him to pitch 30 games.
And I kind of wonder, Joe, if they're more apt for the 5 years they end up giving DeGrom, that's just because they want DeGrom to exist in rotation that Jack Leiter is also in. And if Leiter is everything that he was drafted to be, I mean, you're talking about 2 formidable guys if DeGrom is healthy. So the Rangers could have something cooking there. But I just think for right now, while we're living in 2022 and heading into the 23 season, I just don't think this moves the peg for the Rangers that much.
I think we also have to kind of keep in mind, though, that MLB is in some ways becoming more like the NBA, where so many teams make the playoffs. And now with so many wild cards, like, could the Rangers challenge for a third wild card?
Sure.
Maybe, possibly. Would you want to face Jacob deGrom in that short series? No. Would you say, hey, if this team's kind of rolling, they got the offense going, and they got Jacob deGrom on the top of their rotation, do you think that that's going to get out of that first round? Possibly. Then who knows? Look at the Phillies last year, right? So there's I think a lot of teams are going to take teams that you wouldn't think will take chances because, hey, you have a better chance of getting in. It's not like before where it was basically you have to win a division or have a phenomenal 90-win season. So
yeah, exactly.
The problem with the Rangers is there's no one in that outfield for them. I mean, Semien is going to rebound. I think there's no way he can have as bad.
Garcia had a good season last year.
Garcia had a good year.
That's right. Garcia had a good season, but they need more production from their offense. They still need another starter or two. John Gray's not it. You can say whatever you want about the Martins of the world and everything. They still need another arm in that rotation, and they need
they're really all in. So maybe who knows? I mean, like all these owners, I think we kind of forget about this. Like Steve Cohen gets a lot of the headlines because he is so wealthy, and he is a lot wealthier than the rest of the owners. But the rest of these guys aren't poor. Like if they want, they could go out and spend $350 million a year on a team. And I don't know who owns the Rangers. Frankly, don't care. But I'm sure whoever it is or whatever group it is, they could, if they wanted to, go out and do that. And maybe they do. Maybe they go out and they sign an outfielder. Maybe they go out and sign one of these more mid-level, not mid-level, but not on the top free agent pitchers now. But you go out and you sign someone else. Maybe even bring in like Greinke too, or you bring in another one of these older guys for a one-year deal, and then you roll the ball out there and see what happens.
See what happens. I do think
the Rangers. They brought in Bruce Bochy as the manager this year.
Yep.
They're going all in. They're not. I don't think they're trying to like, oh, let's wait for Jack later and let's wait for some top prospects. Like they seem like they're all in, and maybe these young guys will be able to help, or maybe they'll trade them and they'll start saying like, listen, this is like we can't just wait for the Astros to fall off because it doesn't seem like they're going to do that. So let's go out there and make it happen.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point too with the wild card, Tom, because a lot of teams get in it now. You have the three-team wild card. At first, I didn't like it. I thought I personally liked the two teams, but it ended up being a really fun wild card series. And look at the National League. Phillies barely made the playoffs. They went to the World Series. The Padres cooled off in September. They ended up going to the NLCS. So the wild card, anything could happen, especially if you have a healthy DeGrom in there. I mean, you don't want to go against a healthy DeGrom in a playoff series, especially a 3-game series in the wild card where each game is so critical to win. So that's a great point. I also think with the Texas Rangers, if I'm going to do a comparison and going back to Mets history, this almost reminds me of like the 2005 Mets bringing in Pedro Martinez, where you're trying to change the whole look and the dynamic of the team. You're going out there, you're spending big money on an older pitcher. I think Pedro is also about 35, 34, 35.
DeGrom is at this point, I mean, he's more injury prone, but he's a much higher caliber. At this point, Pedro at his high was as good as anyone has
correct.
Been, but
you're getting definitely a higher caliber pitcher at this point of their careers in DeGrom, but a little more injury risk. But just trying to change that dynamic of the team, because the Rangers were pretty good in the early 2010s. They had a couple of playoff runs there, but they really haven't done much recently.
Right.
And maybe this is that catapult that starts to bring them back to relevancy. I do think they have another big move in them, and we'll touch on that a little more in one of our latter segments, but it's interesting. I mean, it's definitely a move that a team is trying to change their perception. And listen, when teams, especially lower end teams, make those type of moves, take away the Mets fandom with DeGrom aside, I personally love it, man, because you're adding a little more competitiveness across the league. I hate when half the league is tanking. That's boring. I don't want that. I like to spread the wealth a little bit. So good for the Rangers.
This time yesterday, episode 33 was written. It was ready to go. Everything was prepared as possible. And of course, the biggest topic was going to be what we just covered in Jacob deGrom. And so today we expected a little bit more sadness on the Joe and Corey front of the show. Even had a poll question today on Instagram, Empire State of Baseball. What is the next move for the New York Mets. And 57% of the votes went to Justin Verlander. Well, guess what, folks? The New York pitcher goes to Texas. A Texas pitcher goes to New York. And Justin Verlander signed, sealed, and delivered to the New York Metropolitans today for a 2-year contract worth $86 million and a team option for 2025. Now, this one is a biggie, and proving my point that Stevie Cohen is that crazy ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, I mean, listen, yeah, I would be a lot more depressed if we didn't get Verlander. I'm still upset about Jake. Don't get me wrong. I'd rather have Jacob deGrom. However, I don't think that anybody can deny over the next 2 years what is the safer contract that was handed out. Verlander for 2 years or deGrom for 5 years. The Mets are probably going to get at least 170 innings out of Verlander for 2 years, whereas Jacob deGrom, you kind of have to flip a coin. Listen, there's nothing else you can say. Verlander's a Hall of Famer, 3-time Cy Young Award, coming off of Cy Young on a year that he was coming off of Tommy John surgery. Chances are if you hit it right, he might actually get stronger in terms of the amount of innings he's able to pitch this year. So, you're going to get a workhorse in Verlander. You're going to get that guy. The one thing that I worry about with Verlander is his record in the World Series is not good. His postseason record overall is shaky at best. Listen, I know he's going to get me there. I know when it comes to the postseason, that's the best that you can ask for. But if you were going to lose Jacob deGrom, the one guy in baseball that you can get to replace him and feel pretty good about it is Justin Verlander. And that's what the Mets went out and did. So they're going to go into next year with an, albeit old, but 1-2 punch of 2 guys with 6 combined Cy Young awards. That's pretty good. So You know what? Steve Cohen flexing said, you know what? 2 years, and 2 years from now, he's got $86 million coming off the books in 2 years in just 2 pitchers.
Yep.
He will probably, I think I don't know if they fully announced what the vesting option was for the 3rd year, but I thought I read something about innings pitched. And if Verlander, I think it's like 140 innings pitched is what I read. So if Verlander does what you would expect him to do next year, he will be there for a 3rd year, but it's not at the same rate. I think it's like still a ton. It's like 30 something million, but for the record.
Yeah, and that vesting option, it's actually pretty good for both parties, too, because it protects the Mets from the catastrophic injury front. And if he unfortunately has a DeGrom-type year with the injuries where he misses half the season, you're saved from that vesting option. And from Verlander's standpoint, as long as you stay on the mound, even if you have age regression being in your 40s, as long as he gets that 140, he's going to get bank on that 3rd-year vesting option. So I think it's a good option for both teams. And the big two, it was either Verlander or Rodon. Carlos Rodon or Verlander. One of those two is going to sign here. And as high of a free agent right now that Carlos Rodon is, something about him doesn't scream dominance. Granted, great year in 22, great year in 21. Outside of that, what else has he done? I mean, he's missed a lot of time with injuries earlier in his career. He only has 3 seasons, his rookie season in 2015, where he had a 3.75 ERA, and the past 2 where he was in the 2s. Every other season was 4, 5, or 8 in the ERAs. Something clicked with him recently, and this past season with the Giants, I think he actually led the league in starting pitching strikeouts per 9 innings with a pretty dominant 12 strikeouts per 9. That's a solid number for a starter.
Corey, I can actually back you up on that. His combined stats between his 2015 to 2020 season, he had a combined 4.14 ERA. 29-33 record, and that's in 97 games.
Yeah, I mean he's gotten healthy, but I agree with you. Somebody's going to give him 5 or 6 years and $30 million a year guaranteed. Whether it's the Yankees, whether it's the Dodgers, whoever it is, they're going to give it to him. I don't know how that contract is going to turn out. Even more so than DeGrom, at least with DeGrom that you have confidence, when he does take the mound, he's 115%. But when Rodon takes the mound, or if he doesn't take the mound, that's just dead money. I don't. He doesn't have the track record for me to give him that kind of commitment.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to give it to him. Everybody's desperate for pitching. You're going to have 5 or 6 teams probably looking at him, including the Giants, Dodgers, and Yankees. I wouldn't be surprised if you have the Astros now looking at him. But who knows? So.
Yeah.
I think this was the move here. This was the only way that you could supplement the production that you were going to lose with DeGrom at the top of the rotation. They still need more. I would like to see a guy like Bassett come back. I don't think they're going to get Bassett back. I think Bassett wants a 5-year deal. I don't think the Mets are going to give it to him. I think they're going to end up going with the Taiwan Walker type or Jameson Taillon. I could see Bassett going to a place like Minnesota, Detroit, something like that. But
to die?
Yeah, I because I don't see the other teams. Bassett's a weird one. He's 34. He doesn't throw hard, but at the same time, he's a good player. I think he's going to go to a mid-market team. I honestly don't think Bassett's built for a big market. I think there was some question of Bassett's mental toughness late in the season, especially when he blew up against the Braves. So, I'm not 100% sure where he's going to go.
Well, he had what was his comments at the end of the year about, like, wasn't he getting into like when we lose, it's the end of the world? Wasn't that like his?
Correct. It was something along those lines.
So
each loss is the end of the world. Everyone overreacts.
So.
But at the same time, I'm not going to knock Bassett because he was actually our most reliable pitcher last year. I like him. Very serviceable.
No, he was.
Any team in baseball would love to have him as your 3 starter. I don't really want to go 5 years for him, and that's what I'm hearing now as well. We'll see what happens. One last point. I know we got to shift segments in a moment here, but I want to compare Verlander, Rodon, I just mentioned before. I like Verlander because of the higher upside, and he's been there, done that throughout his whole career, whereas Rodon's a little more recently. If you would have told me 5 years for Verlander or 5 years for Rodon, I'm going to take Rodon, obviously, because he's a lot younger. But we did do a poll on Twitter today comparing Jacob deGrom's 5-year deal with the 6th-year option against Verlander's 2-year deal with the 3rd-year vesting option. And myself and 86% of our voters, there was about 30 voters in this poll we had just prior to the show, that all went Justin Verlander for that 2-year deal. I personally like it. Again, if he was 5 years, I'd rather DeGrom or Rodon over Verlander. But for a 2-year deal, I like having that ace material. Granted, playoff record's been a little shaky. We've said it. Not as dominant in the playoffs.
There's not many guys out there who just have dominant postseason, records. You're going against the best teams in baseball. You're not going to have a 2.5 ERA unless your name's Madison Bumgarner.
Well, Verlander has a 6 ERA in the
Randy Pettit.
Yeah, but listen, those guys are very, very few and far between here.
Verlander's had like 8 or 9 starts in the World Series.
Oh, yeah. He's been there. He's done that. And that's why I like it, because the Mets team last year and coming into this season now at Verlander, it's built on high-end, dominant starting pitching that's meant to pitch in big spots in the postseason and a lineup that's good enough. You have some good players at the top, a little weaker at the bottom. You hope the young kids come up and do what they got to do this year. A lot on Beatty and Alvarez, but we'll see what happens. But anyway, we do have a lot more to talk about with the offseason. There's a lot of other players out there who might be signing this week. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, go ahead, follow us on social media at Empire State of Baseball, which is on Instagram. You could also follow each of us on Twitter, the show at ESB Podcast, myself at G Gory, Joe at JR Pugs, Rich at Rich J Rivera, and Tom at T Wospil, or 2Spill as we like to say, on Twitter.
Well done, Corey. It's an exciting time for New York Mets fans. I mean, a roller coaster of emotions, we'll just call that, over the last few days. But Justin Verlander, for Yankee fans, this is good news. Justin Verlander is no longer an Astro. The Astro became semi-weaker without him in that rotation. Now, will the Astros pivot towards somebody like a Rodon or Kodai Senga? We can answer those questions and more, because we're going to touch on the MLB winter meetings. and really get into some of these other free agents out there. And of course, Corey had mentioned in our open, the Phillies signing Trey Turner, 11 years, $300 million. So again, crazy day for Major League Baseball between the two transactions of Verlander and Trey Turner. Joe, I mean, Trey Turner was connected to the Phillies, it seemed like, from the beginning of his free agency. A little bit of a surprise for me. I actually thought he was going to go back to the Dodgers, but the Phillies get in there and give him 11 years today.
Yes. Yeah, that's
I thought this was going to Joe.
A shocking amount of money.
Yeah, it was quite the shock, Joe. Transitions are going great tonight.
I was more shocked that Joe that went that long without talking.
I was just waiting. I don't know if there was a lag or something.
I think my connection bugged out.
All righty. Well, Trey Turner to the Philadelphia Phillies. Corey, what do we think about Trey Turner going to the Philadelphia Phillies? Please don't lag on me.
I'll tell you what. Did it shock me? Absolutely not. I actually was predicting Turner to go. There was going to be Turner or Bogarts. There was rumors of both of them. They ended up going with Turner. Here's the thing with the Turner contract: 11 years. In the short term, the next several seasons, you got some lineup, man. That lineup right now. I mean, you're coming off a World Series loss. A big part of that was because of that power offense. You're going out there now and adding a speedy power shortstop in Trey Turner at the top of that lineup. It just got a lot more scarier. On the flip side, that back end of the contract is going to be a little scary because Turner, what makes him so special compared to a lot of other players in the league is his speed. He's a very fast shortstop at the top of the order there. And they basically gave him the Lindor contract at $300 million over 10, 11 years. The difference between the two players, Lindor is known for his glove and a great bat. Turner's known for his speed and a bat. Well, he's going to lose the speed part. Figure within 5-6 years, he's going to start to slow down a little bit. I wonder how that back end of the contract plays out for the Phillies. I mean, I hope it ends up horrible because I'm a Met fan. But for the short term, if you're a team that's trying to win now in the next 3 years, 4 years, whatever it might be, it's a great deal for the Phillies, and they got a lot scarier.
I think it's what we're really seeing is these. It used to be like 10 years ago, only the upper echelon guys were getting the 8, 9, 10-year contracts. And Trey Turner is an amazing player, and I love Trey Turner, but he's not that level. He's not a perennial top 5 MVP guy. And it just seems now like if you want those guys, and we saw a lot with the shortstops last year, you got to give them a ridiculous amount of money and a ridiculous amount of years, and you have to just say, listen, this is going to be bad at the end. And you would think teams would learn, but then there's always one or two out there who say, we don't care. We're in it to win now.
Yep.
So again, good for Trey Turner, but that's a lot of years. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God.
That's a lot of years, a lot of money. I could see the average, about 30, a little less than 30 years. That I could see, but maybe a 7-year deal or an 8-year deal. 11 years, $300 million. I did not spec double-digit years. I did not spec $300 million. I would have thought maybe 7 for 2, 8 for 220, somewhere in that range. If you want
your guy, you have to go get him now. That's what it is.
Well, yep. I mean, my comp to Trey Turner would be a guy like Jose Reyes. Look at what happened to Reyes when he turned 33, 34 years old and his legs started to go. I mean, even then he was still a quick guy, but if that bat slows down at all, Turner is not going to be a productive player. Forget the legs. I mean, right now he's a 300 hitter, which is great. But if he loses either the legs or the bat, that is going to be a brutal contract on the back end. I mean, I'm sure it's funny. I looked up the numbers, except for the power. Turner's got a little bit more power than Reyes. They're very similar players. They both hit leadoff. They both play decent defense, albeit, a couple of mental gaps at the position of shortstop. They're both phenomenal leadoff hitters, but typically those guys do not age well. Those run first, leg them out guys. So, I don't know what that contract's going to look like. Listen, the Phillies needed to do it. Their infield defense was absolutely horrific. It was the worst in the league last year. Despite getting hot at the end of the year in the postseason, I don't think the Philadelphia Phillies were that good of a team. So they definitely needed an upgrade. They got an upgrade at shortstop. That lineup is stacked. Turner can go up in the one spot. Schwarber can now have somebody to drive in. I mean, Schwarber, I think, had the most solo home runs last year of any player in the big leagues. So he desperately gets the person in on base to drive in. Harper's going to return mid-year, can slot into that 4 hole, probably between Rom or a Bohm or Hoskins. So the Phillies are well equipped. I still think they need a couple pieces. Their defense is still a question mark, especially in the outfield. But they need to do this. Trey Turner is a great player, but I agree with you. I think the years was a little excessive on that end.
Wild stuff, and you got to think of those last 5 years. Turner could potentially be a player that can only play second base and be a backup. So you
that's
feel
every
what
shortstop
those last 5 years would be, but it's obviously for that first half of the contract. The lineup is insane. Looks like a kid playing MLB The Show with that kind of lineup.
Yeah.
Bryce Harper reunites with his old teammate Trey Turner. Schwarber in there as well. Look at Philadelphia Nationals. What's happening over there? The Nationals are the team now for the Phillies. So yeah, wild stuff today with the Trey Turner signing. But let's pivot towards other shortstops that are up there. It's a crazy shortstop market. I mean, Xander Bogaerts, Carlos Correa, and Dansby Swanson all still on the market. Just kind of covering the position as a whole. I'm seeing Swanson is connected to the St. Louis Cardinals once Turner had signed to the Phillies. You know, you look at these 3 guys. Is there any of these 3 guys potentially can get maybe a 7 to 8 year contract? I don't think anything's going to touch Turner's contract, but out of those 3, are we seeing big time years coming out of these guys?
I mean, Correa would be the one who you would think could command that type of deal. I wonder. I know he opted out. I wonder if he would be someone who, you know, the Dodgers would say, "Hey, here's 2 for $80. Come play with us," and just like, you know what I mean? Like, it seems like the Dodgers are more into making those type of deals where these ton of money, not as many years, kind of similar to what the Mets are. Mets are kind of building or kind of modeling themselves after that similar kind of thing. You only commit to real committing guys, and then you give a ton of money to short-term people. Because they're going to have a hole, and I don't think the Dodgers are going to go out there and just not have a premier shortstop. So I would think they could go after one of them. I wonder what's Bogaerts and Mookie's relationship. Maybe he wants to reunite with Mookie out in LA. Swanson is someone who's a very solid player, very good player, but I don't think he's in the same. I think he's a step down from those other 2. It'll be interesting. It will. And listen, IKF is out there as a trade piece if people are looking for a shortstop.
How about this? Because we really haven't touched on the Bronx Bombers. A lot of fans on Twitter today, like Yankee fans in particular, not happy after today. For whatever reason, I guess they thought they were in the market for Justin Verlander and Trey Turner.
Apparently they were for Verlander.
The 2 were merely a blip on the radar, though. I think they were more of like a check-in and see kind of deal, and not more of this is a target that we are going to try to get this offseason. But Yankee fans have been talking about shortstops, and they're like, well, maybe we can bring in one of these guys while Volpe and Peraza comes up. Do you guys see the Yankees trying to make a move on a big shortstop in free agency this offseason?
Not unless Judge signs elsewhere.
Yeah, I can only see it if Judge signs elsewhere. The Yankees can't sell the fact that they didn't bring in a big name and lost out on Judge. Yeah. So I think they would pivot to a Bogaerts or Carlos Correa with the idea that they could eventually move them off the position if one of their young guys is a better option down the road. Listen, I think Correa is done with the short-term deals. I think he wants a long-term deal, especially after he was left holding the bag last year. I can see that happening again where the big teams who are looking for a shortstop, take up 2 of these top 3 guys, and then one is kind of left out in the dust. I can see the Dodgers being in on one. Rumors are the Cubs are going to be on one. I don't know how to gauge the Cubs right now. They haven't kept any of their own guys, so why would they go out and spend a fortune on a shortstop when they don't have a contending team right now? I don't know what the Red Sox plan is. The Red Sox are a mystery to me because the Red Sox should have as much money as the Yankees and Mets do. Maybe not to the exaggerated degree that the Mets have now, but what's their plan here? Betts is gone. There's rumors about Devers being traded. Bogarts is a free agent. And there's no rumors about anything that the Red Sox want to do. There was an off rumor that they were going to be in on Judge all of a sudden. What's the Red Sox plan here?
I don't think they know what their plan is.
No.
So it's very weird. The Red Sox and the Cubs are kind of running in a parallel here, that you don't really have a plan from either of them. They're kind of in this pseudo rebuilding phase that they claim that they're not in, but they keep letting their own star players go.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, now that Turner's off the board, where these players are going to land. I don't see Minnesota shelling out a 10-year, $300 million contract. Detroit's not going to be interested. I don't see Houston no longer needs a shortstop. So where's it going to be left? That's my question.
Yep. I have an interesting proposal going back to the shortstops here with Correa. If you're a Yankee fan, and I'll pose this to Tom and Rich, and Judge goes elsewhere, and they go out there and say, all right, you know what? We're pissed. We lost our guy. We're going to go out. They get Correa. They get Rodon. And let's say they do a trade for Brian Reynolds. How would you rate that offseason? I think that's a pretty decent substitute if
I feel good.
Judge leads.
I wouldn't be mad.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was like looking on Twitter before that. I think that Yankee fans are still pretty delusional on a Brian Reynolds trade. I think it's going to cost so much more than the Yankees. It's not going to cost Peraza and Pereira. Like, that's not going to get it done. It's
not going to cost Peraza and Waldichuk anymore.
It's going to cost Volpe and probably Dominguez, or Volpe, and it's going to cost so much to get him. So I know we might talk about him in a little bit. I don't know. I'd still be disappointed because Judge shouldn't leave. What?
I don't understand the overvalue of Brian Reynolds. He's a fine ball player, but to cost you 3/5 of your top 5 prospects I think is absolutely absurd.
I mean, but like your prospects they're nothing until they come up. Like, who knows? Like they could end up not being anything. Like the Pirates are not, for a guy who's under control still for a few more years. They're not giving him away for your 3rd and your 7th best prospect.
But he hasn't proved anything to be worth 3/5 of your top 5 prospects. He's a fine ball player. I feel like Joe it feels the same way about this, because I know you've touched on it in the past.
I've liked Brian Reynolds, but I've liked Brian Reynolds as an undervalued guy that nobody talks about because he's in Pittsburgh. That hasn't been the case this year. Now everybody is on the Brian Reynolds train, and they're talking about 3 of your top 5 prospects. Those are the kind of trades that you get a mega star for. That's what Mookie Betts went for. That's what Max Scherzer went for. That's what Max Scherzer and Trey Turner went for. Reynolds is not that guy. Listen, I understand he plays a very valuable position in center field. I get that. But I cannot tell if he is a good player on a great player on a bad team, or a good player when he gets on a good team that's just going to get lost in the shuffle. I don't know. I've seen that happen before, where players come from these dead doornail organizations and people pluck them out of there. I remember Jeff Samardzija, who was on the pitiful Cubs for the longest time, and people are like, he's playing in the Windy City. His balls are getting flown out. If you put him in the Coliseum, he's going to have a 2.5 ERA. And what Jeff Samardzija do? Jeff Samardzija basically stole money for the last 7 years of his goddamn career, and everybody thought he was going to be a great pitcher. He's not, because when you put him on a contending team and he faces real competition and real hitters, what are we going to do? He's going to go to the AL East. He's going to face a decent pitcher every night.
For the record, I'm not saying Brian Reynolds is all of that, and Brian Reynolds, if he was on a good team, is going to be an MVP vote getter. I'm saying I think the Pirates value him that way, and they're not going to move him for a package of your 3, your 7, and your 10. I just don't.
No,
I
I'm
don't
not
think
saying
they
that,
will.
but-
I'm not saying. I'm not saying I think he's like the next coming of Mickey
But
Mantle.
doesn't it devalue a player when they take it public that they want to be traded
Yes.
from an organization?
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, if you want to get traded, though, you kind of don't want to get. You want to go somewhere where there's going to be some value left. I never understood that.
Here's the problem, though. He basically made it. There is no way possible the Pirates are trading him. I am telling you, Reynolds might as well be off the board because if they trade him, what does that send to Brian Hayes and all the rest of those guys that the second they want out, all they have to do is say so? That doesn't work in baseball. Baseball, you are one of 25. This is not the NBA where you're one of 5 and you affect the game so much. You are one of 25, and you cannot set the precedent as a team and as an organization. These are 162 game seasons. You get lost in the shuffle if you don't play. Whereas the NBA, if you don't play for a year, nobody gives a crap because they're going to get you back and you're going to play. But Reynolds is not – he's not getting traded. I think he actually just cut his own throat, for lack of a better term, because I just don't see the Pirates giving in to him. I don't.
Corey, to answer your question, if I didn't answer before, yes, I would love an offseason if it was Correa, a Reynolds trade, and a Rodon signing if it's not for Judge.
Nice. Okay.
So,
very good. Yeah. And I think that the big thing with Reynolds, and everyone kind of touched on a little bit too, it's the position. That's what's giving it a little extra value because center fielder notoriously is relatively weak. And forget about Judge and center field. I still think Judge is the right fielder despite playing a lot of games out there in center. But you look at Reynolds' numbers over the last several years. I mean, he's a guy who could hit right around 300. He's going to hit in the mid-20s with home runs. Look at the OPSs. I'm going to exclude the COVID 2020 year because that's kind of an outlier. Look at 2019, 21, and 22. He played 134-plus games in each of those years. OPS, 0.88. 0.912, 0.807. Those are very good OPSs, especially for a center fielder. Granted, is he worth 3 of your top 5 prospects? That I don't know. That to me does seem like a little bit of a stretch, but you're paying for the position. That's the big thing. And he's young, and he's still under control for several years.
He'll be 28, and he'll be going into his prime. Ideally he's going to be getting a little bit better and on a team where he'll have more protection in the lineup. I think he's a very good player. I just think it's going to cost a lot to get him. And I think I kind of agree with Joe that it does make it hard once it's known you want to get traded. You've lost a lot of what the team can get for you. And at that point, maybe they keep him, but they also know they can never re-sign him. That he's a guy. If he was a free agent right now, what kind of contract? Let's say if he wasn't 28, he was 30. Like what kind of contract he would get? He'd be getting something like Trey Turner just got.
No, I don't think so. Nimmo's as good of a player as him.
No, stop.
Yes.
Stop.
He doesn't have as much power. Nimmo gets on base.
Stop, Joe.
We're waiting for one of these.
Joe, I don't want you to embarrass yourself.
And not for nothing. Can we bring up the fact that Reynolds plays the Cincinnati Reds and the Chicago Cubs 40 times a year? Can we bring that up? He plays nobody.
I will say also with Nimmo, I mentioned the OPSs with Reynolds. I mean, Nimmo's right up there too, 800 and 838 the last 2 years. Granted, the power numbers aren't necessarily there. I mean, 16 home runs last year, just 8 the year before, but he also only played about half of the 2021 season. But I think Reynolds' numbers would be right there in the Nimmo range, maybe a little more because you have that extra pop. But probably, I mean, listen, if Nimmo is going to end up getting, some people are saying Nimmo can get 20, 25 a year. So Reynolds at least is in that ballpark if you're at the open market.
Reynolds is the better player. He would be the second best outfielder in the market if he was free agent this year. Just looking at, if you're going to just take his 4 years with the Pirates compared to the last 4 years of Nimmo, Reynolds has the better numbers by far in almost every single regard.
It's not particularly close.
It's not really close. It's like and
he's on a team that has nothing around
271. Okay, it's 74 home runs to 40. It's 239 RBIs to 139 RBIs. A clear 100 right there. Like I know those are the basic stats, but it's
on base percentage is 361. Nimmo's is around 400 over the past.
He has no one in that lineup, and Nimmo walks all. I don't think we need to believe.
Well, that's the big thing too. Is that there are two different types of players. Also, there are two different types of players. Nimmo is
and Brandon Nimmo's a very good player. I like Brandon Nimmo. The whole running to first base when he walks is like the nerdiest thing in all of baseball. But other than that, I love
guy hustles. Would you rather see Robinson Cano lackadaisical at second?
Yeah, on
base?
a walk. Yeah, I will, because you look like the biggest loser in baseball.
Come on.
Next to when Pete Alonso meditates before a home run derby. It's like the nerdiest, loseriest thing in all baseball that he runs the first base on a walk.
Somebody's about to give him $150 million. So
he's a very good player. But
I'll tell you what,
such a schmuck.
And we'll see what happens. And I do not think the Mets are even going to attempt to do a trade for Brian Reynolds. But I would love Nimmo in center field and Brian Reynolds in left field for that team, because they need to center fielder regardless. Because I do not want Marte back in center field. All right.
Are you giving up Beatty and
exactly? That's why I don't think they entertain it. Because the problem with the Mets is your high end prospects are going to be on the major league roster next year. Guys like Beatty, guys like Alvarez, they're borderline untouchable unless you're replacing them at their positions, because they're going to have to start games for the Mets next year. The highest prospect they'll probably trade would be a Mauricio. Maybe you trade Vientos, but you'd have to throw in another guy on top of those two in order to get Brian Reynolds. And I think it's just too much right now, because the Mets farm system, they have a lot of guys who are too far away. And then they have a couple that are right there on the cusp of the major leagues. And I think they got to hold on to them, especially if you're relying on a couple of these guys to be big impact players for the team next year.
I'm not going to touch on it that much, but there were also reports that the Mets are connected to Andrew Benintendi as well, to possibly be that left fielder. Not really going to get into it because we are running out of time. But within the next few days, you guys are on social media going to see our predictions for some of these top free agents and trade targets over the next few days. So just stay tuned to us on all our social media platforms. But if you want to check out tonight's episode and every past episode, Tom, what's the best way to do that?
You want to go over to YouTube. You can check out full episodes of the show. Also, clips of the show. You can find our YouTube page just by going to YouTube and searching for Empire State of Baseball. We also, when we have the replays up, we do put them on Twitter as well. So we follow us on Twitter. Really easy to find us there. Make sure if you do find us on YouTube, you like, share, and subscribe.
Yes, sir. Sounds good. All right. So with the few minutes we have left, let's get into the contemporary committee, which, of course, elected Fred McGriff last night to the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Fred McGriff receiving 100% of the votes. That's 16 votes in total there. Snubbed once again Barry Bonds, Kurt Schilling, and Roger Clemens. We've been through this before with the BWAA's voting in the past, but now we're at the contemporary era committee, the former veterans committee. Joe, is Bonds and Clemens ever getting in the hall at this rate?
Probably not. They, eventually they're gonna be on another committee ballot. We'll see what steroids is at that point. I'm actually one of the people. I'm a small hall guy. I think the Hall of Fame is deserved for the elite of the elite. And you need to be one of those, not only at your peak, but maintain that over the course of many years. So listen, McGriff is one of those very borderline cases, in my opinion. He has the numbers in terms of the 493 home runs, the 1,550 RBIs. He was a highly undervalued player, I think, in his time. A little bit of a compiler, doesn't have that bold type, never led the league perpetually in certain statistics. I think he led the league in home runs 2 or 3 times.
Twice.
But that was about it.
I have his page up.
Huh?
I have his page up. He led the league in homers twice, but
yeah,
36 and 35. So they weren't exactly world beating. Right. Seasons.
Doesn't have that crazy bold type. But listen, when you're up near 500 home runs and you are a player that accumulates that many of the traditional count and stats, you're going to be a prime candidate to get in. My bigger gripe with the committee. Listen, I'll leave the steroid guys out of it. We know what the problem is with the steroid guys. We know that the difference of opinions affect that steroid thing. So the Bonses of the world, the Clemens, the Palmeros, the Maguires. Listen, those guys have kind of made their own bed. Whether it's right or not is another debate. We'll leave those guys aside. I'm looking at the rest of the ballot. I got to ask the question, how is Albert Bell not a Hall of Famer? This guy has no connection to steroids, basically retired before it blew up. Listen, he was a big guy. We all know that. He averaged, his 162 game average was 40 home runs and 130 RBIs. That's insane. He had 300, what is it, Rich? 365 home runs in 10 seasons?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Like, how is this guy not a Hall of Famer? Listen, he was a jerk. Fernando Vina still has a concussion from the hit he laid on him.
He was one of the voters. I'm convinced.
Huh?
He was one of the voters. I'm convinced.
Yeah, I get that. But as far as just pure unadulterated power and slugging, Bell is as good as they come. We could talk about Mattingly. Listen, Mattingly is going to get to the point where Mattingly, it's going to become a lifetime achievement award. That's how he's going to get in. I think that's kind of how like a Phil Rizzuto gets in. Mattingly was a great player for 6 or 7 years, a great player. But we know what happened with the back. He just didn't do it long enough for me. And listen, same thing with Dale Murphy. Dale Murphy for a 4-year period was as good of a player as you had in baseball. But outside of that 4-year period, he was a complete average player the entire time. A completely average player outside of that window where he won back-to-back MVPs. I cannot put Dale Murphy in the Hall of Fame that way. Listen, Schillen, same thing. Schillen's a jerk. That's why he's not in, but that's my opinion. My big thing is Albert Bell. I'll concede McGriff. I won't go crazy that McGriff's in the Hall of Fame. I don't think you lose that aura of the Hall of Fame. Like I think Harold Baines is a guy where some of that aura of the Hall of Fame kind of dissipated. I don't think that's the case with McGriff, so I don't mind McGriff in.
Yeah. I go back to the Bell point real quick before I touch on McGriff and the Hall of Fame in general. I mean, you want to talk about pure dominance. I mean, I love OPS when comparing players. 4 out of 5 seasons in the mid-90s. I mean, he had an OPS over 1 for 4 out of 5 seasons back with it's absolutely insane. And you could debate which one was better, 95, 50, 126, or 96, where he had 48, but 148 RBIs. I mean, both phenomenal seasons. Albert Bell, I think the big thing with him is the personality. And it seems like these veterans or now era committees, they're all about the personality. They're all about the person. They want a class act guy, get him in there. And that, to me, is what Fred McGriff kind of is, as opposed to a Bell, opposed to a Bonds and a Clemens, obviously, with the steroids. Curt Schilling, same thing. Good for McGriff. Great player. Probably got overshadowed a little bit because in his era was the steroid era. So a lot of the big names were these other guys like a Bonds, like a Palmeiro, a McGuire. But McGriff, no slouch by any means of the imagination. I saw in the chat before, I think it was M. Took, said he was going to get 500 home runs, if not for the strike season. He's 100% correct with that. I have no problem with McGriff getting in. He was a borderline I would only vote, if it was me, I would have voted for Bonds and Clemens. Just like Joe, I believe the Hall of Fame should be a very restricted group. I'm personally not a big fan of these veterans or era committees. If you're going to get in, I like it when you get in the standard way. Make it tough. You're either in or you're not, all right? As much as I think Bonds and Clemens should be in, I have no issues with McGriff getting in. Great for him. I'm happy for him. I don't give much. I mean, you're in the Hall of Fame, you're in the Hall of Fame, but I'm not a big fan of all these era committees and other ways of getting into the Hall. You're in or you're not.
The problem is there's so many sports writers who are just like jackwagons who just do stupid things, and they like, I won't vote for a guy on his first, and there's just too much out there that I do think there has to be another way for guys to get in. it's just like they're holier than that. I don't know. I agree. I think I understand why Clemens and Bonds aren't and don't understand how David Ortiz is in that case, but that's a topic for another show. But yeah, good for Fred McGriff. Albert Bell's a name I feel like I haven't heard in a while, and I was just looking at it, and he did have some insane years. Interesting. I wonder. I know he's a guy that was, a little bit before a lot of our time when he was really doing it. We were all pretty young. I don't know. Maybe there were rumors out there of steroid stuff with him because it is a short time where he was that great. It's like a 5-6 year window, and then he kind of just he went away. So. I don't know. Maybe there's more to that story.
Listen, the thing was, and I know John, who's been a guest on the show, is a big proponent of this and says the system's broken and all that stuff. I think the steroids has kind of muddied the water to the point where it just didn't work for a few years. But steroid guys aside, what players are out there that the baseball writers missed? I mean, if you look through the history of baseball, how many guys are not in the Hall of Fame that should be in the Hall of Fame? That's my thing. For the people who say that the writer, listen, there are writers who do stupid things, and we get that. But that's why you have 400 voters. If one stupid decision gets, muddled up with everybody else. The one guy who didn't vote for Ken Griffey Jr., it gets lost to history because nobody cares at the end of the day. It didn't actually affect the end result.
Just stupid.
But
just so dumb.
At the end of the day, what players are left out of the Hall of Fame? Like I said, remove the last 8 years because of the steroids have just made it almost an impossible mess. Everybody's got a different standard. Mine is whether or not you've been suspended for steroids. So I'd put Bonds and Clemens in. I would not have A-Rod and Manny Ramirez in. That's just me. The suspensions matter. But everybody's got their own thing. So, but overall, I think they do a pretty good job. They're very rarely do they ever elect somebody who is undeserving of being in. Most of the time when we have people like the Phil Rizzutos of the world and the Harold Baineses, it's because of these committees that are hidden behind closed doors that vote him in.
Well, there you go. Fred McGriff, Crime Dog, in the Hall of Fame, whether you like it or not, over a 19-year career, near 500 home runs and a 284 batting average. And the achievements aren't that sexy. He's a 5-time All-Star, never won an MVP, but he was in the conversation multiple times. But McGriff is in, and
for the record, Phil Rizzuto did win an MVP and was second one year. So
he's not a Hall of Famer.
Don't let's not get on Scooter. Scooter here.
I don't think he's Harold Baines.
Great baseball guy, baseball lifer, great personality. Not a Hall of Famer.
Well, we can discuss that because Rizzuto is a Hall of Famer, and maybe we can get into some of those Hall of Famers that really shouldn't be Hall of Famers in our next episode, because we are going to cover the National Baseball Hall of Fame at length, because episode number 34 will be live on Monday, January 23rd at 7:00 p.m. Eastern time, which will be the day before we find out the BBWAA's vote for the Hall of Fame. Who knows? It might not be anybody. It might just be Crime Dog headlining the class. So we will find out in over a month's time. But that's a while for us, folks. So month and a half since our next episode. So it's gonna be a while. But in the meantime, we didn't talk about it, but if you follow us on Instagram, you should know that our very own Matt Chooch-Tucker, who is responsible for Chooch's Pick of the Week during the regular season, and I are hosting a special Christmas podcast presented by Giving Grace Projects. It's going to be at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time tonight, right here on Twitch. So if you follow us on Instagram at Empire State of Baseball, the link to the Twitch pod will be there. So make sure to give us a follow at Empire State of Baseball if you haven't already, and then check out the Twitch link tonight, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, a Christmas special called Merry Choochmas. Going to be a lot of fun. But like I said, it's going to be a while until our next episode. But who knows? When Aaron Judge falls, we might have to come back on the air for one more episode between now and the Hall of Fame. So we know that Peg's going to fall eventually. It's just a matter of when, not if. But we do have a scheduled episode 34 at the least for January 23rd. So I think it's a good time to wish you guys all a very happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, but we'll take it around the room here, starting with Thomas.
Guys, breaking news. Aaron Judge is in Tampa for Monday Night Football. He's wearing a Mike Evans jersey. Just wanted to... He's not in San Diego. He's
signing with the Rays.
There you go.
Listen, Yankee Spring Training Complex just across the street. Very close. Same parking lot.
All right, Tom.
Same.
Thanks for that. Joe, anybody you want to thank?
I guess
no.
Okay.
Thank you for Steve Cohen for signing Justin Verlander. And thank you for Jacob DeGrom for pissing off the richest owner in sports. You know, can only go up from here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
I want to thank the three of you and all the special guests we had. M. Took, we had Steve, we had John, great guests on the show. All the choosers in the chat for all your participation in the year of 2022, our first year of the podcast. Also want to thank Steve Cohen as well for spending the big bucks to bring the beautiful Kate Upton to New York, and also for replacing the Wilpons, because if the Wilpons were here, we would have brought in Kyle Gibson and Andrew Heaney and called it a day.
Gotta thank Veronica Tucker for throwing out a signed Cal Ripken bat on Matt Tucker. Good job, Veronica.
Whoa.
I don't know.
Not that we want to encourage that behavior.
What happened there? And that's a Hall of Famer. So that might have to be touched on for our next episode. But if that is the next episode, we'll see you guys there. And yeah, Corey, I didn't even think about it. This could be our final episode of 2022. So I want to thank you all for being a part of all these episodes, from the on season to the off season and beyond. So hopefully we'll talk to you guys soon. If the Judge bomb drops soon, we'll sure to be able to cover that for one more episode at the least here on Twitch. So we'll keep you posted. But of course, we have our Hall of Fame episode guaranteed for January. So that is it. Take care. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.